the computer was designed to make life easier. Complicated tasks could be accomplished more efficiently. Information could be shared more quickly. It was a step toward a brighter future, one that had endless possibilities. Many early developers believed that the computer was a first step toward a kind of utopia.
Are you doing enough? Mark, what's your message to the American people right now?
You do have control and complete control over this information?
Well, Senator, this is how the service works.
When he goes on Twitter and he starts bringing in my in-laws, my parents, my wife, what does he think is going to happen?
WikiLeaks will continue.
People will be astonished at these revelations. The fact that confidential private data has been collected.
But in the foundation of that utopia were cracks.
A man's voice announced that North Korea had launched 3 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and it was coming out of our Nest camera.
This privacy problem and propaganda problem is too big for Facebook to fix, and then we got a real problem.
Cracks that grew and grew until finally the foundation could no longer hold. The perfect world of computers came crumbling down. The digital dream first died at the hand of a new kind of program, a productivity tool built to move from computer to computer called a worm. Inadvertently, the worm revealed inherent vulnerabilities in computer networks. Why were we left so exposed? To understand, we have to return to the beginning.
The computing environment in the 70s was really in a state of transition. We were raised on large mainframe computers from typically IBM with punch cards for the programs. You fed it in, it was batch mode, you waited for your printout.
The only networking for most people was to take the floppy disk out and walk over and put it in another machine. What they used to call sneakernet.
If you're working at something in MIT and you want to collaborate with someone in California, you have to take all of your punch cards or your tape or whatever and physically move it.
The real problem that we found was that the communications was inadequate.
Computer networks were not only needed, but were valuable, and they are gradually coming into fruition.
In the 1970s, computers were learning to talk to each other. It was the earliest days of the internet. The new interconnectivity meant that a computer was no longer just the sum of its parts, that it could work in concert with other machines across the world, sharing their resources and distributing their workload.
As soon as the network began working, we really had a nationwide resource complex.
Programmers everywhere experimented with the new networks. Some of the most innovative work was done at Xerox's Palo Alto Research and Development Facility, called PARC.
What was built at Xerox PARC was really the whole notion of individual machines tied together with a high-speed network. Almost every problem was a new problem.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You come into your office, grab a cup of coffee.
Morning, Brad.
And a Xerox machine presents your morning mail on a screen.
What's the mail this morning?
I think we knew we were at a point where there was a change in paradigm in the model of computing.
This is an experimental office system. It's in use now at the Xerox Research Center in Palo Alto, California. Soon, Xerox systems like this will help you manage your most precious resource, information.
At that point, there was already a rich science fiction literature warning us of this, of what this world would look like.
There's a book in 1975, The Shockwave Rider. He made a big deal out of worms and phages and how they would spread and take over the system.
A worm is a word that was used to describe computer programs that move from one machine to another, computer programs that were designed to span machine boundaries.
I should be clear one thing. A virus is a program that when you run it, it makes a copy of itself somehow. Worm doesn't require you to run it. The worm takes care of its own replication, which is a little more alarming.
We did a particular amount of work in this area in the late 1970s at Xerox.
Xerox PARC, of course, had done these experiments with with programs that could propel themselves through the first experimental computer networks.
What's needed is not a new system, but a new concept, a way to take the office as it is and make it something it has never been, an interactive network. This is the Ethernet cable.
I was actually doing work on measuring the performance of an Ethernet. So we had an Ethernet with 100 machines, and we wanted to load up programs to beat on the Ethernet and see what the performance would be. So we sat down and said, well, we're going to design something different. We're going to find a way to go out through the network. We're going to find and get a hold of other machines. We will reach into them, download programs, turn around and have them beat on the network. And when we're done, collect back the data from the distributed computation. Well, we had our first mistake one night when we had left the worm running to do a test. And we came back the next morning, and many of the machines in the building were dead. What we think happened, we don't know for sure, is that somewhere along the way the code got corrupted, so it was crashing. But a piece of the worm was hidden in some office, but we don't know where they are. You don't know whose machine you've grabbed. So they came in and you would boot the machine and it would start to boot up and it would get seized by the worm and the worm would crash and they'd lose their machine. So they'd push the boot button, it would boot up again, it would start again, the worm would grab it and crash the machine. Oh, that wasn't quite what we intended. That sort of went awry. And we picked up the name worm, which came from the book Shockwave Rider. And by the way, it's a wonderful piece of fiction. The worm has run rampant and we can't stop it, and it's the biggest thing that's ever been let loose. We quote some of the stuff in the paper. We didn't quite fully anticipate that might become real. I must confess, I did not have enough imagination to see that there were people might be arrested for this.
All through the 1980s, stuff was starting to happen.
It was the personal computer revolution.
My cousin put me in front of a Commodore 64, and yeah, I was basically hooked from that point.
This cool thing we were into suddenly is starting to trickle out to the rest of the public.
20 Go to 10 might have been my first programming.
I think Mac is a little toddler now. It's got its best years far ahead of it, and I don't think we've seen anything yet.
It was kind of an era of experimentation. It was us just gathered around like a lone computer, maybe 2 computers at school, and just kind of plucking away.
Isn't that amazing?
People's understanding of computers then was really very abstract for a lot of people.
They've been sold as some kind of magic, mysterious, will do everything kind of machine.
But they knew that big things depended on them, banking and security and nuclear weapons.
Let us turn to the very strengths in technology that spawned our great industrial base.
There was the dark side of the force. There were these big military companies. And there was the light side of the force where there was kids playing with microprocessors, and it was just more fun.
I'm an artist, and I think hardware should be free.
It was a really tight-knit group. It was a strong community.
For sort of middle-class kids who are growing up in the suburbs and are sort of bright science and math students, the idea that you could be upstairs in your parents' bedroom and basically be inside a machine half a world away is really quite a remarkable thing. They were there because it was the most interesting thing around.
But there were events that were becoming problematic.
Are you afraid of espionage or sabotage?
We're afraid of both. We're also aware that subversive groups are after funds. The funds are in electronic data banks.
You lock the office when you're done. That was security at that time. And turn it off when you're done and lock the office door. From my point of view, people probably should have been worrying.
We remember that the world of tomorrow is not going to be like the past.
and the networks we move into are going to be threatened by the KGB, the CIA, Sears Roebuck. So it's up to the entire public to defend itself, to look to the extension of freedom of privacy, freedom of information, freedom of association, and all the things that have made America great in this strange, new, and dark network world.
The more connected we became, the more vulnerable we were to threats that could travel the world overnight.
There was weird log messages showing up in their sendmail log. The computers slowed down.
On Wednesday, November 2nd, 1988, internet-connected computers began to fail across the country.
Once it launched, it kind of goes on and on. The university, the military, defense, they were all suddenly saying, wait a minute, I can't check my email because my computer can't do anything else.
There was alarm because we didn't know what was going on. There was some concern that this might be some kind of a military attack on the United States.
And it just got to the point where administrators were like, we have to shut down these computers. And NASA had to physically unplug every computer.
Surviving on soft drinks and junk food, they battled the virus through the night of November 2nd and into the next day.
It was sort of a bunker mentality in that you were sitting here and very much felt like you were under attack. To some degree, we were kind of scared because we didn't know. In the next 5 minutes, it could suddenly turn nasty and start removing users' files.
The internet had just been created the previous year, and so nobody really knew what it was.
By the weekend, the worst of it had passed.
Berkeley was able to release a patch within 24 hours.
But people were scared.
The GAO had estimates of anywhere between $100,000 to $1 million in damages.
It's possible, maybe even probable, that we'll see another attack reasonably soon. Maybe now.
The day after the worm was first reported, somebody called the New York Times and said they knew the worm's author and they wanted to know what kind of trouble he was in. I had no idea because nobody had been convicted, so I had no answer for him. And then he made a mistake. He referred to the author as RTM. I knew about Finger, which was a directory program, and back came the name Robert Tappan Morris. And I was sitting there puzzling over what to do. It was 3 o'clock. My deadline was coming up. And a source I'd called the day before called me back, calling from the National Security Agency. And we had this back and forth, and I began to realize that he knew a lot more about what had happened than I knew. Finally, I said, I think the author was Robert Tappan Morris. And he said, you're correct. And I was about to get off the phone, and I stopped and I said, well, it's kind of strange. Your name and his name are the same. He said, that's not much strange, that's my son. Robert was a member of this insular elite computer community. His dad was a cryptographer and a mathematician who built the Unix operating system, which would have this great impact on the world. I mean, if you use an iPhone today, you're still using the Unix operating system. Robert grew up inside that world. He was given access to these machines at a young age and became fascinated with them.
The Morris worm, named after Robert Morris, was a project. Robert Morris designed this worm to find out just how big their budding network was.
He said later that he did not intend it to actually be a problem. It was meant to be more investigatory and I believe to figure out the size of the network.
The worm would first look for other computers, and then once it found a user, it knew a bunch of random passwords, and it would just try to see, hey, can I use this to try to log in? And once it logged in, it would then use SendMail to kind of copy itself.
Designed to, reproduce itself automatically on each machine.
It didn't require any user interaction.
It was a program that would have moved from computer to computer in a network and just lived. Nobody would have noticed it.
If he had just had it stop every time the computer said, yes, there's already a copy.
Unfortunately, Robert was too smart for his own good, and he'd spent too much time with his father, and he was gaming out how someone who was thinking about securing their computer would defeat his worm.
He could set it up so that a computer that already had been affected would set a flag and it wouldn't infect that one again. But if he did that, people could interfere with him by proactively setting the flag on all their computers.
So he put in some sort of automatic mechanism that it would copy itself in any case every n number of times.
And so the question was, what's n? How often should I come? And Robert just picked the wrong number.
One time in 7, it would ignore the flag. He thought, yeah, that should do it. But it turned out that wasn't nearly enough to keep it from flooding the network with these copies.
15 different copies of the exact same program trying to do the same thing. And simply put, the computer just ran out of memory.
If he'd picked 7,000 or 7 million, no one would have ever noticed. It was absolutely the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
They apparently got surprised at how quickly it spread. I'm not surprised that worms can spread very quickly. Computers are very fast.
I think some of the surprise was how big the internet had gotten. Wow, there are machines connected to the internet everywhere.
Because rather than talking Moore's father, Robert Morris, was the chief scientist of the National Security, it made a much better story.
On July 26, 1989, Robert Tappan Morris was indicted for accessing computers without permission.
Robert Morris Jr., the Cornell graduate student suspected of causing last week's massive computer virus across the country, made a brief appearance outside his parents' Maryland home today. Accompanied by his father, one of the country's top computer security experts, the 23-year-old Morris did not admit responsibility for creating the virus, but said he was deeply upset about the incident. He said the whole episode has been, quote, a bit...
They really stood together as a family. These great pictures of the family going to the courthouse with their son, who was dressed up in a coat and tie with long hair, but his dad looked like a total, you would have seen him in North Beach in the 50s is what his dad looked like. He looked like a beatnik.
The government arrested and tried and convicted Morris for the damage.
He was not sentenced to jail, but he served community service and he paid a fine. The Morris worm introduced America to the power, both for bad and for good, of computer networking.
Today, the original floppy disks of the Morris worm are on exhibit at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California.
The reason that we remember the Morris worm, and we have a picture of Morris downstairs in the networking gallery, along with a copy of the Shockwave Rider, it was the first one to actually get out there, do real damage to something that was not just within a company like at Park. In the public imagination, this showed that there is this vulnerability. These systems really are weak, and that scared people.
People became less naive and idealistic about the internet. The Morris worm helped people grow up a little bit.
So the legacy of the Morris worm is actually fantastic. It brought attention to the need for cybersecurity. It legitimized groups that were already saying, hey, we need to protect this network.
In a sense, it kind of created the cybersecurity industry in its modern form.
The Computer Emergency Response Team, that's a direct result of what happened with the Morris worm.
But at the same time, the legacy of the worm is lessons that we didn't learn. The outlines of everything that we're worrying about today were right there in 1988.
We had no sense that there were any particular dangers lurking out there. And I think we may have lost that a little bit.
When we were at Xerox 40 years ago or more, going on 50 years, the notion of high-performance workstations, graphical user interfaces, editors, mail, I think we saw that pretty well. We had the imagination to know that there ought to be some great things you could do with this underlying technology. I don't think I fantasized at the time how they could be abused and misused.
The originators they couldn't imagine that somebody would misuse this wonderful thing. They were very trusting.
They had a goal, and that goal was to share information really quickly. They knew that there weren't going to be a lot of people on that network, so it didn't matter. And they knew that everyone's going to be an expert and that there were going to be controls put into who could access it at the time. The network that they built does make sense for that. But if we were to rebuild it and we were able to use a modern understanding of technology and information sharing, we could build in more safeguards.
The ARPANET was built as a research network. The internet was originally built as a research research network with Pentagon funding as well. They were both designed not for the commercial world they came to support. And you could argue that if you built security in at the beginning, it never would have had the commercial success it had.
We continue to see the same kind of attack vector broadly used today. It's absolutely a precursor of what was to come.
Malware coding is business now. They can steal your credit card number and sell it. They can put ransomware on your system, cut out the middleman, give me money right now or your files are gone.
Every computer is connected to every other computer in the world, and oh, by the way, they're connected to all the banks and every secret in the world, and there's no penalty for attacking them. You were just asking for what's emerged. I left the computer security beat largely because I did not see any positive direction. It got worse every year. And in 2012 or 2013, I walked away. And of course, then it became a nation state issue after I left. We did not see that these networks go in both directions, that they're two-way streets, and that it would be instrumental in undermining democracies all over the world as a technology. We missed that. But it should have been obvious to us. And so shame on people like me who read lots of science fiction and knew how dark the cyberpunk world was.
The Morris worm forced us to open our eyes for the first time. Our unwavering optimism would begin to falter. The developers of the computer sought to create an easier world. Instead, they built a vastly more complicated one.